Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. The Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. Use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Go to Gemini.com/card to learn more. Terms apply. See the link in the description for more information regarding rates and fees.
A warm-up from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Rob Donaldson. He does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. We're going to be chatting with him about just the coaching moves that we have seen, a little bit of the volatility there, but additionally, how he's going to be taking a look at these first few weeks of the college basketball season, the sorts of teams that he's going to be looking to bet/fade, some of the power conference teams that he thinks has value, some of the power conference teams that he thinks has absolutely no value whatsoever, and some of the teams that are sort of popping up on his radar, and some of the things that he looks at in terms of teams that are going to be able to have value for the upcoming season. So we're going to be chatting about a wide variety of things with our good friend Rob in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, because I was planning on it being a 2-part chat, but we did see some big news in college basketball on Friday with Billy GIllispie being placed on leave over at Tarleton State. I'm going to have some thoughts there as this happened, the interview with Rob Donaldson after that was announced. So I'm going to give my takeaways on the GIllispie situation, and we'll have ourselves a very fun podcast here today. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LearCM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and over at EdgeBoost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's take a look at this Tarleton State situation as Billy GIllispie has been placed on, and you cannot see me because this is an audio-only podcast, but air quotes, temporary administrative leave as the school investigates an anonymous complaint. They did not go into the specifics of the complaint, but you can probably safely assume that it comes from GIllispie and is just overall coaching style. He has been known in the past to have been under scrutiny for that. He was over at Texas Tech for one season, and he was effectively fired / he sort of left it very, very abruptly. He claimed that it was health concerns, but he was facing allegations from the mistreatment of players. We have seen a lot of articles. I know that one of my good friends, Rob Donaldson, many years ago, back when he was over at NBC Sports, he posted up a very, very long expose on Billy GIllispie, the way that he did not treat his assistants very well. He ran his players into the ground, things of that nature, and it's still so surprising that Billy GIllispie was brought back as the team's coach, because if you go back to what Tarleton State did during the 2023-24 season, Billy GIllispie took a extended leave due to health concerns once again, and Tarleton State experienced their most success at the Division I level. Now, they spent quite a bit of time at the non-D1 ranks, but they went 25-10. Billy GIllispie actually got credit for all those wins, but it was actually Joseph Jones who was coaching up the team at the time, and he did a really, really good job. He's now an assistant over at UT San Antonio, so he's no longer with the staff, and now it's going to be Glenn Cyprian who's going to be getting the chance to be able to coach up this team. I would have to think that he is going to be running a lot of the same sort of things that Billy GIllispie was, as he served as an assistant under Billy GIllispie when he was over at Texas A&M many years ago, and I believe that he was an assistant on his staff when he was over at Kentucky many years ago as well. He's trained up quite a few guys, so I do think that a lot of the system is going to be remaining the same, but it's very clear that Billy GIllispie was not getting the most out of his players, typically ran them very, very hard, and this might not be the world's worst thing for Tarleton State, but that now gives us 5 coaching moves essentially that we have seen here over the last 4 weeks in college college basketball. I cannot remember a period outside of like March into early April where obviously you have coaching hirings/firings at the end of the season where we've seen so many coaching moves like from May until October. So this is a very interesting one, and honestly, I don't think that's one that's going to be hurting the Texans too much, and if I'm being honest here, might be a little bit of an upgrade. We will see what Cyprian is going to be able to do as he was just hired on during the summer months for this Tarleton State team, but as I said, Billy GIllispie right now under investigation, has not been canned or anything like that, but it could be changing by the time that you listen to this podcast. So big time news there, and what's always great is being able to chat with Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He joins me next right here on Cusco Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is great to be joined by this man as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. Right now, in terms of his actual bets, he's taking a look at a lot of baseball, much like myself, but much like myself, he's doing an amazing job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. I know that he is hard at work taking a look at all these teams, much like myself, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And my goodness, man, I say it every single time, and I'm going to continue to say it until we actually have games, but we are so darn close to the season starting up here. Almost feels unreal that we've gone through a full summer. We're already into October now, and man, there's a lot of kind of teams that we're looking to fade, teams we're looking to back, and I'm excited to talk ball with you here today.
Absolutely. And Rob, I do think that we've got ourselves just so much to be able to take a look at for the upcoming college basketball season. I just recently did my Big 12 conference preview, and I think that the Big 12 can return to a lot of prominence this year. With the SEC and the Big 12, I think that's going to be a 1A, 1B in terms of top conference in all of college basketball, because I think the SEC is a little bit deeper, but when I look at the Big 12, I look at those big bomber teams this year, like Iowa State, Arizona, obviously Houston, and I think that in terms of like the top 4, top 5, the Big 12 has the advantage and the SEC has a little bit more depth this year.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty fair assessment, because who knows what even a wild card team like a Kansas, for example, with a whole new look roster and obviously Bill Self, who will always be Bill Self to a degree, how does that team look? How does Texas Tech look with now kind of a new look roster of their own? I think to your point, there's a lot of things that kind of make up the characteristics of each conference. And, when you look at the Big Ten, maybe they don't have that kind of star-studded team that stands alone, a la Duke in the ACC, but they have a number of teams that can beat any number of teams in college basketball. And I think that characteristic of the conference, one, it translates over to conference play, but in particular, more so non-con play, is kind of where we see it come to fruition more often than not over the course of a season.
Yep, it certainly does, and we all recall what the SEC was able to do last year. Every single team in that conference, I think other than South Carolina, had 1 or 0 losses, which that's absolutely incredible. I am not sure if we are going to be getting quite that level of dominance, but I do think that it's going to be interesting to take a look at some of these teams that are going to be ones that are going to be worthy of backing and fading, because there are certain teams that, even though they don't necessarily play super duper fast, they do cover a lot of those big spreads, like Houston, for example, has been one of those teams. Iowa State, we all recall what they've been able to do last few years in non-conference play, and I think that those are big-time teams of intrigue, because when it comes to those big spreads, they can be some of the most difficult games to handicap, but I think that that's the one time where trends can actually be sort of your friend, because that's where you do see some of these teams turn on the gas, really try to embarrass teams that other teams show a little bit more mercy.
Yeah, and I think ultimately when you are looking at these teams from a betting standpoint of, hey, who can I back, who can I fade? If you're looking to fade certain teams, there has to be a certain perception about how good those teams are, right? You can't just, fade a team that you think is going to be bad and everybody else thinks it's going to be bad and have success with those spreads, because the spreads are going to account for everybody thinking that's a bad team. Vice versa as well. If it's one of those kind of trendy, a lot of transfers came into this team, a la, a St. John's, maybe, don't say I'm going to back St. John's because I think they're going to cover every spread, because again, the books are going to account for that sort of thing. And so when you're looking at the teams who I notably kind of want to fade in the early goings, I am looking at a Florida, obviously a national champion, a team that's overseeing a lot of roster turnover. And we saw this last year with UConn, but the second you lose that kind of nucleus core that got you to the big dance and won it all for you, what happens that following year? Sometimes it's not an easy little transition. And as we kind of saw with UConn, they went through some really bad times last season in the regular season and non-con play, and then in the NCAA tournament as well. So that's a team I key in on. I also key in on a team like a BYU that's bringing in a fresh new look roster with a lot of 5-star hype, and almost I kind of want to see it before I believe it and back it. So that's kind of the two differing angles that I take a look at there in the scope of college basketball. I think could be profitable at the end of the day.
Yep, and I think that is so important to be taking a look at as well. And I do think that with regards to continuity, that is going to be so big towards the front half of the season. And that's why a team like a St. John's, I'm probably going to be looking to fade a lot more towards the beginning part of the season, just because they don't really have that set point guard that you're able to bank on towards the beginning part of the season, while a team within that same conference in UConn bringing in a lot of guys like Alex Caravan, much of that backcourt. I feel like they did a good job of adding in their transfers that very much fit the system. That's a team that we know that in non-conference play over the last few years, since last year, they have been a complete and utter bulldozer, and I think they can get back to being that, while a team like St. John's, it might take them a little bit of time to be able to find their footing.
Yeah, what happened to a team like right? Obviously is constantly bringing in talent, but it's new talent. There's no Kyle Phillips in the mix after they had him, bridging the gap between Coach K and John Shire's career, 10-year rather. And then obviously last year they have Cooper Flagg step into the mix, and almost like they didn't skip a beat. Maybe they even got even better. Well, now Duke doesn't really have that kind of main focal point guy who's just going to step on the floor and take over a game or have that upside. What happens with a team that's just kind of loaded with front-end talent, but we haven't really seen that talent actually come and rise to the surface yet? I think that's a really good kind of fade opportunity in the early goings, and who knows? Potentially that's just a team that ends up being a dud, and that fade value becomes a really nice profitable stretch through the first 2 months of the season.
Yep, exactly. And I do think that those younger teams are ones that are very, shall we say, interesting to be able to gauge. I do think that some of those younger teams can provide a little bit of value, and sometimes they can burn you as well. Like, I take a look at a team like in Arizona, because we were mentioning the Big 12 a little bit earlier. They are going to be based around quite a few of their freshmen. They do have a few returning guys like Jaden Bradley, but they do lose Caleb Love, who could always very much shoot you into a game, and boy, could he shoot you out of a game. And that's a team I think is going to be very intriguing, especially towards the front half of the season as well, because we saw them struggle in the first month and a half last year, and then really find their swagger.
Arizona is one of those teams that I think when you are looking at the Big 12 hierarchy, immediately inserted themselves into the mix. And I do think regardless of kind of what happens in terms of roster turnover, they're still bringing enough guys back. They're still bringing new talent in. And the Big 12, to the point that we were just kind of making, does feel a little bit more wide open. Houston is that consistent piece, but even Kansas over recent years has fallen off. Texas Tech is introducing a new look roster. Baylor hasn't kind of been the national championship caliber Baylor team that we've seen in years past. And for that reason, it is opening the door to a team like a BYU that I just said I don't really want a part of in the early going, but it also opens the door to a team that I think has been a relative model of consistency, even if they can't get over that big hump with a team like in Arizona. So, yeah, I think when you're looking at the Big 12 hierarchy and even how they can perform in the early goings, Arizona might be one of those teams that you just inherently want to back.
Yep, with Arizona, I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to look at them, because I really like the fact that they've got Toby Awaka down low and Monte Uvas-Crivas. A lot of people thought that he was actually going to be the star of the team last year. Fortunately for them, Henry Vassar was able to step up and he was able to be rock solid, but I do think that is such an interesting team to be taking a look at. And just in terms of some of these power conference teams that are flying a little bit under the radar, maybe they're in the fringe of the top 25, maybe they're outside the top 25, but you see a little bit of upside with. Are there a few that really come to mind that you think might be a little bit undervalued towards the beginning part of the season? And even if they are playing against that plucky mid-major and they're laying some points, you might be looking at them to be able to provide a little bit of bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think there's a number of really good teams that are falling well below the radar, and for a number of different reasons. It might be a coach introducing his kind of first roster at a new program. I think there's a number of ways you can go with that, whether you're talking about Maryland, Iowa, NC State. But I think one of the coaches that people I think are just getting, I don't really know what the word is, maybe just tired of, or just kind of like, oh, well, they're there, but they're never really relevant. It's Mississippi State. And Chris Jans, Mississippi State, I get it. They've fallen short of expectations a number of different times. I've fallen victim to it as a backer of them, kind of believing into the hype of, oh, they're finding offense in the early goings. Let's see how this goes into SEC play. And then all of a sudden they go on a losing skid. Well, once again, they are returning some players. Josh Hubbard is coming back into the fold. Jaden Epps is going to be there. They have some size down low as well. And Chris Jans, say what you want about him getting over the quote-unquote hump. He is consistently winning games at multiple different stops. And I do feel like Mississippi State in the non-con play in particular could really do a number just because they do have the guards, they do have the size, and what we've seen just from a track record in non-con play is a lot of success. So yeah, if you want to take a shot on a team to quote-unquote back on a betting angle, I would go ahead and take Mississippi State through the first couple months of the season.
Yep, and Mississippi State is going to be a lot of fun with Chris Jans being at the helm. And I know we've talked about this on my podcast quite a bit as Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. But I do think that because with the SEC, it does feel like it's much more, shall we say, balanced, and it's very, very evenly matched. Might be the most balanced conference outside of like the Atlantic 10 in all of college basketball, that it could lend some value on those teams that a lot of people are going to be picking like number 8, number 10 in their way too early SEC conference preview polls, while the teams that are at the top like Tennessee and Florida might be a little bit more fade candidates, because I think that the difference between a team like a Tennessee and Florida versus a team like, say, a Vanderbilt, who you just threw out there, Mississippi State, is much, much smaller than a lot of people want to believe.
100%. I think that's the dynamic of certain these deep conferences that you got to take a look at, because obviously, we're anointing Michigan in the Big Ten as like, oh, they're inherently in the top 3 because of course, but you go back 2 years ago and we weren't talking about Michigan being a top 3 team. It's just that college basketball nowadays with transfer portal, NIL, coaching switches, things can change in a literal blink. I mean, Louisville went from the worst team we've ever seen in our lives to making the NCAA tournament with Pat Kelsey in year 1 purely because of a new head coach, purely because of talent getting brought in, and immediately in a wide open quote-unquote type of league, we saw that jump. There are a number of leagues this year that I think are wide open from a standpoint of those traditional powers that be. I look at the Big 12 with Kansas, not really being in the immediate fold anymore. It's one of those things where, yeah, of course, Kansas could get right back there and it wouldn't surprise anybody. But if they aren't there, who takes that spot? And a lot of times it's not just another blue blood stepping into the fold. It's a team that's taking advantage of the moment. And right now, there's a lot of teams that I think are building rosters, introducing coaches that can take advantage of that moment. And that makes college basketball, in terms of the product side of things, a really fun one, in my opinion.
Oh, no question about it. I think that there's going to be a great dynamic out there in terms of the SEC, and I do think that a conference that is near and dear to us, the Big Ten, is going to be so interesting as well, because that's always a conference that has a big giant middle as well. And what are your thoughts on a team like in Iowa, where it's going to be a completely new look team? As we know, Iowa has always been very notorious for the overs. They've been notorious for playing absolutely no defense whatsoever, but having good offense. And now they make a complete change of Ben McCollum, and I think that's going to be very interesting to handicap that team, because I think Ben McCollum is going to be very tried and true to his style, even though it is a big step up going from the Missouri Valley Conference to the Big Ten. And frankly, they had that last year with these guys going from the Division II level to the Missouri Valley as well. But I think that that's going to be one of the more fun things to take a look at, because for Iowa, if things don't go right, and if the talent level in the Big Ten is just too much for them, they could become a fade. But if they show what they did last year out there in the Missouri Valley Conference, this is going to be a team I think might be undervalued all year.
Right now, I think there's even a misconception around Iowa that they're going from this high-paced scoring offense that only shoots threes and scores, 80 points a game, to this slow Virginia-esque type of team. And the reality is Ben McCollum, outside of that one Drake year last year, has actually been a very, very balanced head coach who launches a lot of threes, who does score high points, but also is measured on the back end of games, because in Division II, you have that talent advantage, the way that Ben McCollum did at Northwest Missouri State. And all of a sudden, it's just one of those things where you can actually, dictate how a flow of a game goes. Well, now when you're stepping up in the Big Ten and you do have talent, I do think we're going to see some elements at play of, hey, let's have that slower, methodical style against teams like a Michigan or teams like a Purdue. But we're also going to see that style actually ramp up and result in some offense, I think, as well. And again, when we're talking about those wide open leagues, when you are looking at a team like a UCLA or a Michigan or an Illinois kind of being slated in that top half, well, there's a lot of roster turnover among those teams. And when you're also talking about just how those teams have performed when they have been intact, it's not like they're lighting the world on fire and taking the world by storm. These are all kind of teams that have made the Sweet 16 and haven't really pushed past that point. So, yeah, a team like an Iowa, a team like a Maryland in the Big Ten, heck, even a team like a Washington out there right now that's kind of building up something potentially interesting. I think all these teams have a chance to kind of rise a little bit further than what we expect. And the Big Ten is just one of those conferences right now that kind of feels like it's wide open.
Oh, yes. The Big Ten certainly does feel like it's going to be very wide open. And is there a team out there in the Big Ten that you're either feeling bullish/bearish on? Because obviously Purdue is going to be picked as that number one team, Michigan that clear number two. But I think after that, it's a big giant hodgepodge with, in my opinion, all four of the West Coast teams being relatively plucky and some of those teams being a little bit undervalued too.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with those West Coast teams being the ultimate wild card because the travel schedule is interesting. I don't know if those West Coast teams are ever going to truly have a leg up and in your regard, even if they have the talent on their side, because it almost kind of feels like they're on these weird road trips every other week. But when you look at Eric Musselman, when you look at USC, by far a more talented roster this year than last. And we're talking about freshman talent. We're talking about transfer talent. Chad Baker-Mazara is entering year 75 of college basketball, and he's decided, you know what, I'm leaving Auburn before Bruce Pearl even left, and I'm joining Eric Musselman out here in USC. We'll see how that team comes together, but from a pure talent standpoint, they are definitely there, and we know Eric Musselman to be a really fantastic coach. So I do think that USC is one of those teams that right now is kind of in the middle. Last year wasn't ultimately relevant at any point in time, and I do think they could rise to the surface in a massive, massive way this season.
Yes, I agree with you, and I do think that we're in for just such an incredible college basketball season. Rob, you've joined me so much on this podcast, taking a look at everything, the high majors, the low majors, the mid majors, the power teams, the small teams, a little bit of everything, and I know that prior to the start of the college basketball season, you're currently doing a great job of handicapping the MLB playoffs as well, so love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's always a blast talking ball with you, my man, and I can't wait until we're talking about individual games as well. But, you know, for those who want to follow my bets in Major League Baseball leading up to the college basketball season, you can do so on Twitter/X at RobDFB and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
Always appreciate Rob. His insights are second to none. He does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of basketball, and every single time he joins me, learns such great insights. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we will fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. And we've got 3 conference previews remaining: the Big East, the Big Ten, and the SEC. You'll be getting those in the coming weeks, and once we do those, we're going to be all set for the upcoming college basketball season, which will be a banger. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.